I'm very happy to introduce my colleague Joseph Ringel to give a talk on a subject we hear a lot about, but never really, or very few of us see from the inside, namely what life is like in an Israeli settlement. I've talked to Joseph a number of times about this and the culture and civilization there, apart from what hits the headlines, is absolutely fascinating, connected to Judaism and to Israel. But it really has developed some different aspects of all sorts. So Professor Ringel received his doctorate in history at Brandeis in 2010?
2011.
11, and is a visiting professor here this year and next year. He's teaching classes on Israel generally, Jews in the Muslim world, and religion in Israel. The latter topic is pulling students at a record rate. Your class for next semester is almost filled already. Mine, which is supposed to be larger, has 4 students so far. So I may have to borrow some.
I'll be glad to lend some to you. If you want more students, no problem, Mr. Gray, no problem.
Okay. So I'm very intrigued to hear the subject of this lecture, and please take it away.
Okay, well, I wanted to thank the Israel Studies Center for hosting me, especially Paul and Yoram for hosting me, as well as and I'll go, I guess, right into the subject at hand. Following the murder of 5 members of the Fogel family of Itamar, which is a small settlement located near Shechem, or Nablus, right, in Samaria, in the northern West Bank, Bret Stephens, writing in the Wall Street Journal, penned an article entitled, "Are Israeli Settlers Human?" That was the title of his article, March 15th, 2011, decrying the demonization of settlers in Palestinian culture and the quote-unquote understanding evinced for such a point of view in various Western cultures. Stephens demanded a reassessment of the nature of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Coming from the opposite political spectrum, as we know the Wall Street Journal is to the right, Udi Fogel, brother of the murdered Moti Fogel, distinguished himself at the funeral by focusing on his brother's humanity and rejecting his being used as a political slogan by the Israeli right. Explaining his comments in an interview in Haaretz, which is left-leaning, on March 25th, 2011, he said, quote, "I admit that I was apprehensive about how people would respond to what I said at the funeral. But a few people from my parents' area told me they deeply related to what I said and that it was important to say it. The settlers, in quotation marks, are first of all human beings. It sounds very dumb to say this, but they have private lives, and it was important for them to have a private element at the funeral." So unlike so many other presentations, this one deals not with the Gush Emunim ideology, settlement ideology, or the conflict over land, although we're going to get to some of the dialogue over land at the end, but revolves around the basic question that relate to general religious life in the settlements. And we could talk about different kinds of settlements. There are secular-oriented settlements, there are mixed settlements, but I'm going to be focusing on religious life in the settlements. While settling the land forms a key element in their religious lives, people's religious activities in the settlements should not be reduced to settlement of land alone or to political issues. My purpose is to illuminate the nuances of the settlement movement by addressing broader cultural issues. The treatment of settlers as mere cogs in a settlement machine dehumanizes the individuals and obscures an appreciation of their role in the creation of new forms of Jewish thought and practice. It is essential that any serious academic scholar of contemporary Judaism and of the settlement movement take these new forms into account and not be hampered by political biases in either direction. So whatever direction you want to take, if you want to take a critical perspective, which we all should as academics, by all means, but we need to be nuanced in our criticisms. A disclaimer. My main area of research until recently has not been settlements, but Sephardic religious culture in Israel. I came upon this topic incidentally after having visited a boys' Sephardic elementary school in Itamar that is affiliated with the Sephardic ultra-Orthodox Shas party. And after having visited Yeshivat Birkat Moshe, an advanced academy, a yeshiva for older students in Ma'aleh Adumim, which is a settlement near Jerusalem with strong Sephardic, or the yeshiva has strong Sephardic influence. This past winter, I decided to delve into the topic of settlements and the religious school system in Israel by broadening the types of institutions I visited, using a grant from the Meyerhoff Center here of Jewish Studies and by the Gildenhorn Center of Israel Studies here at University of Maryland. I spent my winter break going around visiting different schools affiliated with religious Zionism, especially those in the settlements of three places, and we're going to get to them on here as well. And Alon Shavut, which is a settlement near Bethlehem, and Otniel, a settlement near Hebron. So my paper will begin with my findings, and we'll have a little outline here, of four different schools. First of all, Talmud Torah Itamar, which is a school, as I said, in Samaria, northern West Bank. The second is Yeshivat Birkat Moshe. You can see it right there. Can we see this, by the way? Or is it shadow block? Right, which is in Ma'aleh Adumim. The third is Yeshivat Har Etzion, known as Gush, which is in Alon Shavut near Bethlehem. And the fourth is Yeshivat Otniel, which is in a city, actually it's a yeshiva of Otniel, that's what it literally means. Otniel is a settlement near the Hebron Hills, or in the Hebron Hills. So any good analysis of cultural life in the settlement, which is really what I want to get into here, must define the basic contours. So I specifically looked at the academies of religious settlements as centers of thought and cultures, and as such, the issues permeating the academy affect the spiritual life and ideals of its students and those around them. Remember that we're dealing now with a very heavily religious community. So they're very often institutionally connected throughout their lives to a yeshiva until their early adulthood. And many of their values are shaped by the institutions they were raised in. I will look at four main parameters of religious identity and life within the settlements. Two of these parameters revolve around the perennial tension between law, which intends to set boundaries, it's number one over here, and spirituality, which often tends to try to break boundaries. When you spiritually want to be free. Law, Jewish law, though, sets boundaries in our spirituality. Right? Similarly, I want to deal with the tension between intellection, or intellectual pursuits, which is a very strong element within traditional Judaism, and emotional creativity within Judaism, and how the tensions between the two relate to each other within the academies and permeate different aspects of life. The second element that I want to deal with is the role of hermeneutics. That is the role of methods of interpretation and methods of study. This is very important within a religious culture because religious culture is very much defined by traditional texts. So debates over how to interpret texts play out as a very strong debate within the academies and affect the way people actually lead their lives. So one of the key questions I'm going to deal with is both variety of methods of interpretation used in different places and to what extent methods from the outside right, meaning methods coming from outside the traditional community, such as academic methods, are to be used and integrated into the curriculum. How are they supposed to affect your spiritual life? Are you supposed to ignore them, or are you supposed to somehow integrate them? To what degree are secular spheres of life to be integrated into religious life in general, and how? And fourth, I'm going to look at the place of Arab and Muslim neighbors. We're going to see actually a wide variety of views on this topic, right? Both from the very right, the radical right, and from the left. And this will again show to kind of humanize this entire enterprise and see some of the nuances within it, right? Which will lead to which in my opinion will lead to a more nuanced critique than, let's say, a generalized view of settlements that only focuses on one specific issue, such as politics or land. So first I need to talk about some of the breakdown of the religious world in general, just to give some of you as a background. First we have what is called the Dati Le'umi, which I put down as integrationist. Literally it means, I should have put down national religious. That's what it literally means. These are religious Zionists. Religious Zionists historically tended to, first of all, they accepted, the fact that they're Zionists meant that they accepted modern forms of nationalism in some form, including Zionism. So they did not oppose the development of the Zionist movement, even though it was heavily secular. Second of all, they tended to be integrationist, right? Because they wanted to integrate into the culture of this new settlement and eventually state that was being formed in Palestine/Israel. That's one group. Another group is the Haredi. Haredi means he who trembles at God's word. It was originally used by a specific radical community in Jerusalem that rejected Zionism, right? And so it was specifically referred to as used by one group of people who called themselves, we are Haredim, which is a plural. We are those who tremble at God's word, unlike those seculars, unlike those Zionists and their allies, right? Who really do not tremble at God's word, right? And then we have now, the term Haredi has grown over time, so that today it is applied to a wide variety of different groups with different views as to how to integrate themselves into modern culture and as to how to integrate themselves into Zionism, right? But a common denominator seems to be, between all of these groups, seems to be either a kind of view that emphasizes the separatist side of life, or the non-Zionist side of life, the exilic side of life, the side of life of exile, more than the new developments within modern times, including the State of Israel. That seems to be a common denominator between all of the different groups. Then you have a group called Haredi Dati Le'umi, or kind of more comically, Hardali. Hardal means mustard in Hebrew. But it's a contraction of these two words, Haredi, or three words, Haredi Dati Le'umi, which means they are both Dati Le'umi and Haredi. How is that possible? Well, it means that they combine forms of religious Zionism, right, with a kind of emphasis on separating from other elements of Israeli culture that they deem to be negative towards religion. Right? So now that we have some of the basic terms down of the religious world in Israel, I want to break down now the religious Zionist world further by institutions, by types of institutions. So first of all, some institutions, right, are known as yeshivot kav, which means, yeshiva means academy, kav means line. So yeshivot are academies, it's a plural form, of the line. That's what it literally means. That means the line drawn by a variety of rabbis, led by a rabbi named Rabbi Tzvi Tau. This is a very conservative approach. Rabbi Tzvi Tau broke with a major religious Zionist academy called Merkaz Harav. I'm going to get into a little bit more about Merkaz Harav in a minute. It had been the leading and religious Zionist academy in Israel. They broke with it. This goes back probably about, by now at least 20 years, probably around 20 years, over academic style studies of Bible, among other things, right? But that's what's significant. part of the break, and this is based on conversations with people on both sides, had to do with a movement to introduce certain styles of academic style of study of Bible into religious academies, or academicized study of Bible, and they rejected it. And Rabbi Tzvi Tau is the head of a yeshiva called Har Hamor in Jerusalem. Other groups rejected the Yeshivot Kav approach and was more integrationist. And those groups include three of the yeshivot I visited, Otniel, Har Etzion specifically, as well as to a certain degree, Yeshivat Birkat Moshe, I would argue.
When you say academic style, you don't mean biblical criticism.
Academicized style, that's why I said.
It's not biblical criticism.
I was not able to, because it was only winter break, I was not able to sit on enough classes in order to judge it. Okay? Definitely archaeology, that they certainly use, and that can also pose trouble. Yeah?
You're saying the first one did include it, or what did it?
First one did not include. They would oppose. They were conservative philosophy, right? It's a conservative approach.
Okay.
Right? And they are associated with the Hardali, the first approach. The others would be kind of more mainstream, I guess what we would call them. It's kind of hard to say mainstream, I don't have the population figures. But they would be more in keeping with certain amounts of the mainstream Dati Le'umi of, let's say, 50 years ago. Okay? Now, there are types of hermeneutics. There are also different types. Now that we're going into some of there's a lot of heavy background here in order to get us into the mode. Right? Because if I'm going to be discussing hermeneutics with you, I need to tell you, right, exactly what the meaning, what kinds of hermeneutics actually exist. What kind of interpretations of texts are used that form the basis of a lot of sensitive debate. Right? For us, again, for many people in America, these kinds of things are harder to understand if they come from a kind of general secular environment. But if you think about it, think of the debates amongst constitutional lawyers between Democrats and Republicans and how heated they can get. Well, these debates can get just as heated because they're essentially over the same thing. How do you interpret a text? Okay? So you have Sephardic-oriented approaches that are very text-based. They're very philological, and they deal with a lot of literary issues. Why is one word used instead of a different word? Right? Why does one statement appear next to another statement? Right? You have other Sephardic-oriented approaches and Hasidic approaches that are focused on practical law, what's called in Hebrew halacha l'ma'aseh. Okay, we have a discussion within a legal text, a long-ranging discussion. How do you interpret this over time? How is this interpreted and applied at different time periods? Okay? Then you have the Lithuanian conceptual analytical Brisker approach. It has a bunch of different names, depending on what term you prefer to use. And that is to resolve contradictions within the texts, not by literary analysis necessarily, though that could play a role, but by conceptualizing how each text uses a term differently. And by conceptualizing a term, you are able to kind of ameliorate the contradiction. I'm going to give an example of this as we continue, because right now it's very abstract. Okay? Then you have the academic approach, which is, of course, an approach that most of us would be familiar with, a critical approach. It has the power to undermine a text by deconstructing it, right? But on the other hand, it might illuminate certain issues. Right? It might illuminate why a text seems to operate in a strange way better than other methods. Okay, so it has an upside for a traditionalist, but also a downside, perhaps. Okay? The third issue that I want to deal with, and this has to do with interreligious dialogue, is a debate about a man named Rabbi Abraham Kook. Those of you familiar with religious Zionism know that Rabbi Abraham Kook, who lived in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, who was eventually a chief rabbi, Ashkenazi rabbi of Palestine, was a major religious Zionist leader and a mystic, as well as a Talmudic scholar. Okay? And there are debates as to how he looked at the purpose of the national revival of the Jewish people. Did he look at it as a definite sign of a coming messianic redemption, which is the take that his son has? Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook is his son. His son was the head of Merkaz Harav in Jerusalem, right? And therefore many of those followers of that school of thought would oppose land for peace. Or is Rabbi Kook simply wishing or hoping that this national revival is the beginning of the redemption of the Jewish people, and therefore, and perhaps, or part of the reason, part of that interpretation would allow for supporting the exchange of land for peace. And I put down in a parentheses Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, who we'll get to later, who was a proponent of the land for peace formula. Rabbi Yehuda Amatal, Rav Soloveitchik. I don't want to mention.
Son-in-law of Soloveitchik.
Correct. We're going to get to him later as we get to the Gush. Well, I'll introduce exactly who he is. Okay. So first, I want to deal with Talmud Torah Itamar. Here we are. Talmud Torah Itamar. Talmud Torah Itamar services families, children from families within the local vicinity of Samaria, and therefore reflects some of the most ardent supporters of the settler movement. Okay, those who are looking at the headlines, Itamar is right next to the settlement of Yitzhar. Okay, so those of you who look at the headlines know what I'm talking about. There's been issues over there. It's right smack in the middle of Samaria, right near Shechem Nablus, which is a center of Palestinian militancy as well. So we have a major clash of cultures going on right there. And this is again where a murder of an entire family took place that I introduced earlier on. So this is really at the heart of a lot of the current violence right over here in this area. This school services students, as I said, from families who are basically a mixture of different ethnicities and ideologies, according to the school official that I spoke to, including Hasidic ideologies such as a Braslaver, Chabad. I'm not going to go into all of these details. Those of you who know Jewish studies will know what I'm talking about. These are some of the most, in some ways, some very radical movements. Mizrachistim, right? Those people, Sephardic Jews, right? Jews who draw from Middle Eastern countries, and they all learn according to Sephardic methodologies. And this was what I was exploring when I originally visited Itamar. The official described the community of the school as being made up of religious Sephardic national Zionists, and this is a term he used, who are Haredi b'mitzvot, who are Haredi in terms of their observance of commandments. Remember, the term Haredi means punctilious, or really means trembling at God's word. Right? It's become a political slogan, but he is saying that we are religious Zionists, but we are very punctilious in our observance of commandments. Okay? So in some ways, in my dissertation, I deal with how they're less acculturated, let's say, than other religious Zionist schools would be. Right? And basically, the official explained these statements to me that the school incorporates elements from all of the different rabbis. This is a term he used. Following the advice of Abraham Isaac Cook, who encouraged the incorporation of positive elements from all different schools of thought into one's philosophy, rather than siding with one approach over another. And so therefore, the school, which I said affiliates with an ultra-Orthodox Sephardic party, the Shas school, identifies with the ultra-Orthodox value, the Shas value, of knowledge and love of Torah, right? Knowledge and love of Bible and God's Word, God's teaching, even as a community disagrees with Rabbi Ovadia Yosef's support for the exchange of land for peace. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef is the head of the Shas party. He supported the exchange of land for peace, at least officially, right? There are a bunch of nuances within the responsa itself, but he supported this, right? And he is saying, the official was saying, they do not agree with him on that issue. Right? So you see a variety of influences here. As evidence from the syncretistic philosophy of the school, the official pointed out the wide variety of illustrations of rabbis hung up on different classroom walls that included Haredi leaders, Lubavitcher, Chabad, Hasidic leaders, Sephardic leaders, Sephardic quote-unquote saint figures, as they're often called in the literature, to whom people go for blessings. There are some pictures of them as well. Sephardic scholars, all sorts of different kinds of people, all kind of being presented somewhere within the school, in some wall, some office, some classroom within the school. Right? He even showed me a candle the students lit in memory of a tzaddik. Tzaddik is often translated as saint. Probably a better translation would be righteous person. Right? This is within North African Jews, it is very common to venerate people, righteous people who have passed on. Right? And so therefore he informed me that they do all of this, even the Ashkenazi students, even the non-North African students, right? And thereby he revealed the recognition of the importance of the North African traditions within the school. The sheer magnitude of the rabbis involved reflects not only the school's syncretistic philosophy, but the wide variety of approaches among the families of the students. That's really what, because any school has to be geared towards the students. Right? Because it is clear that for the school, the non-Zionist rabbis still play a role as models of piety, a value that is revealed within some of the captions themselves. So you'll have some captions of, let's say, a major Haredi leader known as Israel Meir Kagan, the Chafetz Chaim, who wrote works against gossip. So you'll have lines, basically you'll have slogans, right, preaching against gossip with the picture of this, under the picture of this rabbi. So this rabbi is not there because they identify with his Haredi views. He is there because they identify with his piety. In addition, the school marketed itself based on its educational methods. We go down a bit here. Okay, so I don't know why this wasn't saved here. I had actually, that's strange. Must be different. Let me see. Here, it's right here. It's the same one. Okay? So the first issue is shinun. The first unique style of learning is shinun. Shinun means repeated recitation. Right? Almost kind of repeated recitation with the idea of kind of inculcating or memorizing specific texts, especially biblical texts, into one's psyche. Deuteronomy 6:7, discussing the words of God, states, "Vishinantam levanecha," repeat or recite them to your children. And so the Sifrei, the halachic midrash interpretation of Deuteronomy, interprets this verse to mean that you should sharpen the words within your mouth, right? So that when a person asks you something, you should not stutter, but tell him the answer right away. You can just recite it right away to the person. So that verse is the origin of the ideal of the exact knowledge of the divine word. Right? So therefore you memorize it and you internalize the message. And that was actually the primary method of instruction until the advent of printing. Right? Now in modern times had a major debate. Should these methods keep going? Should people still continue to memorize when you have plenty of other ways to preserve texts? Or are there other positive value towards memorization? And in Jewish tradition there are. As I explained before, you actually kind of inculcate the message better, it was assumed, than if you look at it at a text. You get the message better if you memorize it. And so therefore, this debate has now played out within the school system, and this school is very much involved in having their young students, memorize entire sections of Bible. So I actually went into a 3rd grade classroom, and I started chanting from the book of Deuteronomy for them, and the students immediately piped in. By heart. Exactly what happened. Similarly, I went to a different classroom. I started reading from a book from the prophets, and they again chimed in right away, by heart. Right? So this is a major element of their Judaism, memorizing texts. Right? And by the way, you have similar debates in the Islamic world today. Should Quran be memorized or understood, especially by people who don't understand the language? Right? So in Indonesia, this becomes a major debate. Okay, so this is not unique to Judaism. What is interesting here is that the method is modernized because today the gulf between biblical Hebrew and the language the children speak is much less. There's still a gulf to a certain degree, but it's much less. And so therefore, the school used what is called I should have put Zilberman method. That was my mistake. The Zilberman method, in which you go not according to the order in which the books are read in the synagogue, as was done in previous times, because in previous times memorization was to get children used to the readings within synagogues, but now in modern times the purpose of the school is to teach Jewish values, which had formerly in the past been taught at home. In a secular culture, you can't rely on the home. You got to teach it in the school. So they go in order, in actual logical order, historical order. Right? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, etc., and the prophets are all done in order. The prophets would have been done out of order in previous generations. Now they are done in order. Right? And significantly, Shinun, this is considered to be an old Sephardic method. Similarly, later ages do not use Shinun. Right? For a young child, 7 or 8 years old, to expose them to advanced analysis wouldn't make sense pedagogically. Little kids love to memorize and sing. So this is a good time to get them to memorize. When they're older, the students are taught to analyze according to the Sephardic method that I had mentioned before, that kind of method in which philological analysis, you look at each word, right? Without commentaries, you look at each word of a Talmudic text, a legal text, and you try to see how each word is necessary for understanding the meaning of that text. So that's what is done. All of this activity, I should emphasize, occurs against the backdrop of the importance of the land. Countless posters throughout the school emphasize the state as the footstool, in the words of Rabbi Cook, of God's throne, and quote his comments on the fullness and truth of Jewish life in the land of Israel as opposed to the diaspora. The Zionist settlement orientation can also be seen in the curricula, which combines the study of nature, teva, and homeland, moledet, as in the older grades, as one subject. And so therefore, going out and studying the flora and fauna of the land become a way in which land is claimed for yourself. And this is well known to those who study the Zionist movement. This is very typical of many Zionist schools, that they will go out and have the children of the schools hike the land in order to kind of reclaim it for themselves and connect to it. So none of the proceedings to deny the importance of land, but to contextualize it. Traditional literature abounds in the discussion of the purpose of commandments, of mitzvot, obligations commanded by God, which include, according to many, settling the land. In many schools of thought, obligations serve a greater purpose than the minutiae of the acts themselves. It ends up being a debate, but this is a debate. Religious and cultural Zionists had one thing in common. From earliest years, the Zionist Mizrahi and cultural Zionists point to the effect of the establishment of an autonomous or independent Jewish settlement as a way to revive Jewish culture. And for religious Zionists, it meant reviving religious culture. And Rav Kook's hope that this establishment would create an ideal society that would lead to global redemption is very well known. So what I'm saying is that the experience of settlement is not merely about connecting to land, but building an ideal, holistic Jewish life. In the case of Itamar, Talmud Torah Itamar, that means connecting the best of all traditions, whether Hasidic and Sephardic, or even Haredi, to the current reality. Behind the rejuvenation of Sephardic practices at the school is a very human desire to reach into one's past and to connect to something greater. And the gathering of exiles into one land makes it possible to create the best of all Jewish worlds by blending all of these diasporic traditions, Hasidic, Sephardic, etc., and making them all of everyone's heritage. Also at the school is involved in these different schools of thought, whether they're Sephardic or not. I will endeavor to show the case that this is also the case for the other schools I visited. So let's move on now to Yeshivat Birkat Moshe. So here we have a link over here. Let's see if I can. Actually, this is a Hebrew link, so this is probably, it's not going to be as useful because it's a Hebrew link. I will, for those of you who are curious, I will post it so you can see where it is. There we go. Here is the English, perfect. Okay, here you can see an entire history of Shivat Birkat Moshe, when it was founded. The two people I want to focus on, was founded in 1977, as you can see, are two people, Chaim Sabato and Yitzhak Shilat, two rabbis at the school. Okay, those of you familiar with academic literature, Israeli literature, know who Chaim Sabato is. Chaim Sabato aside from being a rabbi, is a major novelist. He has written on the Yom Kippur War. He has written novels about the Yom Kippur War, as well as about his own background, his own ethnic background. He comes from the Syrian tradition. So you have a variety of books that you can read written by him. Okay? And Rabbi Yitzhak Shilat, who is a rabbi involved in publishing manuscripts. Okay? So here you have a novelist and a kind of a person involved in what we would consider quasi-historical research, trying to look at manuscripts and determine their authenticity and republish them. And this is a major, right? These are two major figures at the school. So the leadership is involved in republishing the works of Maimonides based on these manuscripts and encouraging the blend of academia and traditional methods of study as developed in Lithuania. We're going to get to more specifics in a moment. And its publishing house, right, has a wide variety of books on all sorts of different subjects, right? Whether it be politics, whether it be law, Jewish law and politics, whether it be spirituality, whatever you're interested in, that you can actually go to their Maliot store here, and you'll see a wide variety of books. This is in Hebrew here. These are all the different. Let's see. We have all the different categories right here. Large number of different categories. Okay, but probably the most well-known yeshiva in America of all the yeshivot that I've been talking about is Yeshivat Har Etzion, or Gush. There are two main figures associated with Yeshivat Har Etzion. One figure is named Rabbi Yehuda Amital. Let me get a picture of him for you here. Here's a picture of him. Rabbi Yehuda Amital, right there, was originally from Hungary. He's a Holocaust survivor. Passed away in 2010. Right? Is one of the former headmasters of the school, and actually founded it in 1968. And he served, you can read this is a blurb here, I'm summarizing this blurb, but this is well known. He served as a kind of bridge between secular and religious communities during the 1990s, during the Oslo Accords, at a time of increased tension between the religious and secular communities, right? And at around the time of the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin by a right-wing yeshiva student. Right? So in this capacity, Rabbi Amital headed the national religious movement known as Meimad. I may have put this down here. Known as Meimad. Meimad was a party that sought compromise on the issue of land for peace, as opposed to the more typical, harder opposition common within the settlement world. And this caused tension within religious Zionism. In 1971, another rabbi, American rabbi, Aaron Lichtenstein, joined him. And here you can have him, there's a nice picture of him here as well. Right here, right? Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein comes from the U.S. He's a son-in-law of Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, who is a leader of modern Orthodoxy in this country. And his own erudition in both Torah scholarship and general studies can be seen in the fact that he received a doctorate in English literature from Harvard University. So here is a man who brought with him a strong tradition of synthesizing Western thought and Torah scholarship. And therefore, the Herzog Teachers College, which is affiliated with Har Etzion, takes a quasi-academic line to the study of a variety of disciplines. And my own attendance on some of the classes on Bible at this yeshiva itself indicated an openness to combining the findings of archaeology with traditional commentaries on the Bible. Right? In fact, the library there has extensive collections of Jewish and academic books, including from non-Orthodox sources. Okay, so that's on the one hand, they're very integrationist. At the same time, Talmud study, within at least the courses that I sat in on, remained within the traditional framework, not the academic framework. Right? And so in order to understand some of the main differences between the traditional framework that is used at the school, which is Lithuanian in character, and the academic approach, I have to go into a little bit of background. Okay? So they stick to this, what's called this conceptual approach. The conceptual approach goes as follows. Let's say you have two contradictory texts, or a text that seems to use a concept in contradictory ways. How do you solve the problem? Right? One way of solving the problem is to say, well, you apply one text in one situation and one text in another situation. That was used hundreds of years ago. That methodology was used hundreds of years ago. That's one way of doing it. Right? But another way of doing it is to preserve the distinctions in full, really, but to create an increased understanding by conceptualizing what the differences exactly are. Right? So, just to give an example, I'm going to have to give this is not a Talmud course. I'm going to have to give an example to bring it down to a kind of general level. You have the most famous example of this. There are two statements in Maimonides' Code of Jewish Law that seem to contradict each other. On the one hand, Maimonides rules that if you recite the main prayer within the Jewish liturgy without any kind of concentration, you don't fulfill your obligation, and you have to pray again. That's very understandable, because prayer is all about what? Prayer is all about connecting to God. On the other hand, later on, he rules that it's only when you don't concentrate on the first blessing of that prayer, then you need to go back and redo the prayer. Otherwise, you can continue. Otherwise, you can just finish it up. Right? How do you resolve the contradiction? Right? So some critics would say, okay, you have one concept. You have to have concentration. How do you apply that concept? How do you apply the concept? You don't apply it strictly, you apply it liberally. So in the case where you don't focus on the first blessing, then you need to go back and say it again. Otherwise, you can still continue and you've technically fulfilled your obligation. Not in an ideal sense, but you've done it. Right? The Brisker approach disagrees and says, no. There are two different facets, conceptualizations, of what it means to have intent, to concentrate. One facet is knowing the meaning of the words. Remember, people did not speak Hebrew for many centuries fluently. First, you got to know the meaning of the words. Second of all, intention also encompasses a consciousness of God around you. So when Maimonides says you have to have concentration while praying, that was referring to a case in which you need to have a consciousness of God. If you don't have the consciousness of God for any part for the entire prayer, then forget it. You got to go back and do it again. But you don't necessarily have to know the meaning of the words, right? As long as you have the general framework that you are standing before God, that's good enough. The only time you have to know the meaning of the words, the only time you have to focus enough to know the meaning of the words is the first blessing of the prayer, right? So there you see the conceptualization. You're conceptualizing the concept of intention or of focus, okay? On the other hand, the problem with this is Maimonides never suggests this distinction everywhere. He doesn't say this anywhere explicitly. So some people would argue that this does not represent anything that he ever intended, right? And that seems to be a crux of the major debate. What I'm saying is that at Gush, they stick, unlike within Tanakh, unlike within Bible, where they stick to they combine academic methods with traditional methods of study, within Talmud, they stay to the old line. And we can discuss why in the question and answer session. There are some different theories as to why they do this, right? But this was the subject, partly, of criticism by other schools of thought that were even more syncretistic than the school of thought at Gush. And that school of thought is represented by a man who is well-known, starting to become well-known in Israel, is not well-known at all in the States. His name is Rabbi Shimon Gershon Rosenberg, Rabbi Shagar. Rabbi Shagar, who passed away now a few years ago, was quite young, right, was one of the, probably is now, so many books of his come out that I would dare say that he's probably more influential now having passed on than when he was alive, as in many great figures. Rabbi Shagar, okay, is a thinker who was a postmodernist. Now, for most postmodernists, will reject the idea of authenticity. Postmodernists tend to deconstruct things. They tend to say things are all very, by nature, all constructed. There's no real objective truth to any specific thing. But yet, Shagar combined the quest for authenticity with postmodernism. And here we can see that part of the person who really brought my attention to Rabbi Shagar was a former mentor of mine, Professor Alan Brill. And we can see that he has his own academic blog here that we're going to access here, because he summarizes one of Shagar's major elements of Shagar's philosophy, as incorporated in many of these books over here, or in actually one of those books specifically, right over here. He says as follows. You can read it right here. Okay. What is novel in Rabbi Shagar's thought, I'm reading from Alan Brill's blog, is that these other fields, what we're talking about here, talking about other fields such as academics, Hasidism, literature, Jewish thought, etc., cannot and should not be done in the university, but in the Beit Midrash. The Beit Midrash is a Hebrew term for the study hall. They should not supersede Talmud learning of the legal discussions within Talmud, but be part of a study session on the list of sources for the class. Rather than look to the university as places of character formation, Rav Shagar said the Beit Midrash and the study of Talmud is a character formation of the yeshiva student. Therefore, a person who studies Torah is informed in the study hall and can only create a personal relationship with Torah in the study hall. And if you bring all of your emotions with you, you're a very multifaceted person. You need to study everything. You need to bring Hasidism, academic Talmud, philosophy, poetry, modern literature, scholarship, sociology. All this needs to be taught by rabbis themselves in the Beit Midrash. You should not replace Talmud, but you should integrate all these fields into Talmud study. And here we have Kafka, David Grossman, Rav Nachman, etc. Those of you who knows that these are people all with different backgrounds, academics, Idel, Maimonides, David Grossman, all these people are literary people, academics, secular, academic, rabbinic, classical rabbinic. All of this stuff needs to be combined in one. This was the philosophy of Rabbi Shagar. And actually there's a very moving tribute to his life and thought. It's all in Hebrew. It's posted here. If those of you who want this link can send me an email, I'll be glad to send you the link. It's a really wonderful movie. I'm not going to show it because it's in Hebrew. And that would have to translate each and every part of it. Okay? But this major school of thought, right, really influences the final economy I'm going to discuss, which is the economy of Otniel. Otniel is a product of rabbis, and again, Otniel is in the Hebron Hills, trained under Shagar and Lichtenstein. So Lichtenstein, Rabbi Lichtenstein, has a very conceptual approach from Har Zion, very conceptual approach to Talmud study, believes in the combination, the integration of religious and general thought, okay? But he himself is a very strong intellectual. And Gush has a reputation among yeshiva students as a very intellectual kind of place. Okay? Shagar is both intellectual but also very emotional. And you can see the movie to all of the activities he was involved in. He himself was a poet. He encouraged students in music, etc. And both of these influences come together at Otniel, which was founded in 1987 by these two rabbis, and by this rabbi, Rabbi Benny Katznelson, who run in as well as other talented to the school. And it is also the product of two mutually opposed rabbis in some degrees, but who have one sense of commonality. Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who was the represents a more messianic strand of religious Zionism, right? The strand that was the head at the forefront of the settlement movement, and a man named Rabbi Menachem Froman. Who was Rabbi Menachem Froman? Let's get to here. Rabbi Menachem Froman was a very interesting person, very unique figure. Here is a picture of him. Here's a eulogy for him. He just passed away, literally a few weeks ago. Menachem Froman, rabbi seeking peace, dies. And you can see him praying with Muslims in the West Bank. That's what he's doing. Right? And here it has an entire history. But essentially, Froman was a founder of Gush Emunim, founder of the settlement movement, but he was involved in interreligious dialogue. he was involved in talking to Muslims, and not just any Muslims. Not only did he talk to Yasser Arafat, he talked to representatives of Hamas. He talked to Yassin, who was a previous leader of Hamas. So here you have a settler who is supposedly one of the most, who would supposedly be a very strong figure in terms of, coming down very hard line, having a dialogue with some of the most irredentist figures on the Muslim side. Pretty amazing. And his whole philosophy was counterintuitive. He said, basically, the settlements are the key to peace. Why? Because they're the only place that Palestinians and Jews really meet each other. I mean, they live right next to each other. Come on, all you have to do is look out from a settlement, and you're probably surrounded by a bunch of Arab villages. Very easy to have, right? And not only that, they have one thing in common. Palestinians and many of the settlers are both religious. And since religion is at the center of the conflict, according to Froman, therefore only religious people can really solve it by discussing religious issues. Right? Therefore, for instance, he was a proponent of discussing Jerusalem in negotiations first, not last. Because the only way you're really going to solve the issue is discuss Jerusalem first. Right? Very interesting, very kind of out there, and really kind of formed his own aura and his own following. Right? And so here we have these two elements of influence at this yeshiva. So what is this yeshiva all about? So first of all, you go to Otniel. I had the chance to spend about a week at Otniel, including a Shabbat, including a Sabbath there. You go to Otniel, the first thing you notice is the architecture. First of all, the yeshiva is located on the top of the hill. Remember, settlements are located in hill country. This is the Judean hill country. Right? So all settlements, whether Arab or Jewish, are located on hills. Right? So you look up on the hill, and on the very top is the yeshiva. So that is the center of the town, so to speak. The architecture of Otniel also kind of points to this centrism. You go into the Beit Midrash, into the study hall, and what do you see? All classrooms are connected to the Beit Midrash in some way. There's not a single classroom that is not in some way connected to this big study hall. That means when you go into a classroom, you got to go into the study hall first. So the study hall is a focal point where everyone goes. Even the lunchroom, I should say, or the dining hall, is located directly beneath the study hall, the Beit Midrash. That's the first thing that you notice, is already just the architecture. Okay? So here we have also, I put interfaith. I'm going to first talk about music and theater, and the variety of classes and activities that go on there. Okay? The general class, okay, is a very participatory class, and all rabbis there teach small classes in philosophy, Talmud, Hasidism, all types of things. Okay? But there are even para-Torah activities in this the word of one in form. What's the para-Torah activity? Meditation, yoga, visualizations. Right? You have people involved there in meditation. This goes back to the two influences on Otniel. Otniel is influenced by two major figures, by figures trained under two major people. One is Rabbi Lichtenstein, who is influenced by the Lithuanian school of thought, which is intellectual. Shagar is a product of a number of schools is really a product of a number of schools of thought, but religious Zionism in general has a very strong Hasidic and Kabbalistic influence to it. Very strong emotional influence to it. And therefore, the mystical influence in religious Zionism, right, lends itself towards emotion. And here you see a kind of combination of intellectualism and forms of spirituality. So here you have music and theater as well. In fact, there are some books here. These students even put out their own music booklets. We have entire music booklets with notations here. We have CDs. The yeshiva even puts out its own. This is what's called a birkon, which is a small booklet of songs that are traditionally sung, both Sephardic and Ashkenazic songs, sung in Itamar, and it comes with a CD. You can actually listen to it. And here we have a large number of books of kind of these spirituality books. Here's stories from life, right? What you can do with various experiences in life. So the experience of all of life is extremely important. The one rabbi there is actually heavily involved in meditation and also in interfaith dialogue. Right? And I'm going to put down, let's see, we have, I'm going to actually, we'll skip it towards last because I want to kind of conclude, leave time for questions. We'll come back to it later. But he is involved in interreligious dialogue. And I should say that which we're going to get to, I'll get to that at the end rather than now. But I'll first focus on the music and theater. And that I can tell you about my own experience there. I can tell you that it was pretty incredible. Actually, it was very incredible. Probably the most incredible Sabbath I've ever had. The spiritual experience of welcoming a Sabbath at sunset, dancing in the Beit Midrash overlooking the Hebron Hills, where you can go onto the balcony and see the sun setting. It's an amazing experience. The yeshiva had a musician, Israeli musician, come to play before and after the Sabbath, a major musician, to get everyone in the mood. And a university professor, now I say a university professor, not a rabbi necessarily, or they may have been one as well, but he was introduced as a university professor, spoke on the differences between Maimonidean and Hasidic approaches to the spiritual meaning of nature, different philosophical and emotional views of nature in Jewish tradition. The waiters every Sabbath put on a comical play based on the Torah portion. And very often, there's a lot of, innovation there. So the rabbi will often, I wasn't there for this, but I'm told that the rabbi there will often take out a Torah scroll that's normally read from only during official services and read from it for part of his sermon. That's very unusual. I've never seen that ever within a, I know of people who do it. I've never actually seen it in any synagogue. I know of people who do it, but that's how innovative they are. Okay? But this is not fluff. I want to kind of emphasize that. This is not fluff, because the school is very intellectual. So you have one rabbi there, Re'ema Kohen, who has books describing or commentaries on entire tractates of the Talmud, such as tractates on the tractates that deal with sacrifices that are very easily spiritualized. You can connect very often spiritually to sacrifice to God or to prayer. So his commentaries on these texts take into account the academic part of the legal elements to the text, how these legal texts are formed from different layers, how they reinterpret the original text they're quoting from in ways different from the original intent. How later Kabbalistic and mystical sources, based on these interpretations, go a step further and show how these legal practices, as we practice them today, fulfill some kind of cosmic significance. Right? All of this, right, he derives from the general original meaning, as understood by academics, to see how it changes over time, why it changes over time, and what it means for us today. So once you're done with a typical class of his, you see all of these elements of Jewish thought, all of these changes within Jewish thought over time, all of this reinterpretation, and how and why that reinterpretation occurred, and how that somehow still connects to the original meaning. And so instead of undermining the text, the academic methodologies serve to buttress the meaningfulness of later reinterpretations. That is what goes on within that school. I just want to get into a little bit now of the interreligious dialogue. And for that, I'm going to go to the following website I just had here that I just lost in a second. Okay, here's what I'll do. Okay, this is from Alan Brill's blog, and here is a video of Rabbi Yaakov Nagen. Just listen for a few minutes to see what he's talking about.
Parshat details the consecration of the Mishkan. The Mishkan, which ultimately evolved to be the Mikdash.
Okay, he's talking about the consecration of the tabernacle in the desert, according to the Bible. That is the Torah portion that was read that week, or that will be read that week. He's going to be talking about that.
Temple. Now, through Avram Avinu, monotheism spread throughout the world. However, even nowadays, temples, by and large in the world, are idolatrous. They have idols and statues inside of them. In fact, a monotheistic temple sounds almost like an oxymoron. Temples are so concrete, so tangible, and the Jewish monotheism, belief in an invisible God,
Can we all hear this?
all present, never seen, would seem to be almost contradictory. However, even nowadays, there's one notable exception to the temples that have idols in them, and there is one monotheistic temple still in existence. That's the Golden Temple in Amritsar in northern India. And I'd like to talk about the Golden Temple in Amritsar, and use that as a basis to look at the similarities and differences between the Golden Temple and our Beit HaMikdash. Often, similarities can give insight about the significance of different factors, and from the similarities, we can highlight what's truly unique. But I'll give first some introduction to the religion that created the Golden Temple, the Sikh religion, and that's because I think it is significant for...
Okay, so what I just want to point out is this man knows about Eastern religions. Okay? He's actually been to Tibet. Right? He's involved in interreligious dialogue. Now, people like Froman were involved in politics. Right? I don't know the degree to which he's involved in politics, but he is involved in religious dialogue. And essentially, he had pointed out a number of elements of his I say rabbis there, officials there, did point out to certain elements of interreligious dialogue that some of them are involved with. Okay, so he said as follows. One informant there, one rabbinic figure there, told me that the school believes in Eretz Yisrael Shlema. Eretz Yisrael Shlema is the slogan of the Likud, the right-wing party, right, classically, that wanted to keep all of the land conquered by Israel in the 1967 war. And yet, many also are involved in interreligious dialogue. Now, how is it possible? Right? It's true that Froman himself actually was willing to live in a Palestinian state. He himself said that. He would live in the settlement as a Palestinian. He said that. Okay? Here he's not saying that, but he is saying that the point of the dialogue is to get to know your neighbors. And that will lead, he says, to a more realistic arrangement than an unnatural separation of land. And this is in this official's words. He was in fact disdainful of secularists in Tel Aviv who like to talk about peace, but who never met a Palestinian in their lives. It's obviously a stereotype, but my point is not to talk about the accuracy. The point is to understand the mentality. Okay? Citing Yaakov Hasdai, a specific figure there, he said, quote, the conquest, the kibush, in English you say the occupation, did not corrupt us, right? But we corrupted the kibush, the occupation. Lo ishchatnu, kibush lo ishchitotanu, ela hishchitanu et kibush. That's how they said it, right? We didn't corrupt. So this goes into interesting discussion of power politics. But again, this is his point of view. And therefore, he actually points out, this official actually pointed out that he is not the only one involved here. Froman used to visit many times during the week. And we had students, he said he had one student who would go around to local villages and who actually composed a prayer on behalf of Syrian civilians. And that prayer on behalf of Syrian civilians was read, and I heard it read, right? It was more generalized from the way I heard it, but I have to go back and look at the text. but apparently was in reference to them, is read every Sabbath. Right? And these now we're talking about, right, again, think of the significance of this, settlers praying on behalf of citizens, or I should say subjects really, subjects of an enemy state. Right? That's a very significant aspect of this. Right? And so you see there's a wide variety of views within settlements on all sorts of issues. Right? Whether we talk about hermeneutics, whether we talk about spirituality, whether we talk about curricula, whether we talk about how to live their lives, right? All of this really serves as really a major element of settlements today. I would go as far as to say that there are so many settlements that now function as intellectual centers that it is impossible to understand religious Zionism today or contemporary Judaism today without understanding the schools of thought coming out of these settlements. And via these schools of thought, we can see some both very radical and nuanced approaches to a whole wide variety of issues. And so, in my conclusion, I would say that academics studying settlements need to study settlements both like political scientists and anthropologists sensitive to religion. They have to study general tendencies, general trends, right? They need to condemn violence or violent ideologies when they see it, right? But they also need to understand the nuances within the situation, right? And the nuances within the positions taken on a whole wide variety of issues. And in order to understand settlements, it is much more helpful to actually go there and play the role of anthropologist, to talk to people who are there, examine what they have to say critically and use current literature, anthropological literature of what's going on, right, within the intellectual and political worlds, and see how that really creates a very strong movement within settlements that, again, is nuanced, and that is not something easily given over to stereotyping. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for a view of something many of us knew very little about. I'd like to start the questions with something that perhaps your talk was trying to get
yeah, that's going to hit the lights
away from. But is there a political, religious correlation or a parallel you can draw? Obviously, Froman, for many purposes, on the left, even though idiosyncratically a different places, Rav Lichtenstein and Rav Amital. But Otniel, and also it sounds like your first example from Itamar is on the right, identifying with the more right-wing tendencies general in Shas. So can you connect? Is there some general, I guess, a typology, perhaps there isn't, that you can show, and how does this connect with politics? And finally, is there a religious conservatism that parallels a political conservatism?
Okay, so let me just kind of backtrack to the beginning of it. When I understood from your question, there is definitely a similarity between all of these different groups, and that is a commitment to settle the land, right? So the same point that I was making was simply a point, not that it shouldn't be studied, but it's been studied so often, right? Sure. And only focused on so often that people miss the nuances within the movement. And therefore they miss, by the way, a lot of this stuff going on, which sure. Some of these scholars who study it would be more happy with what's going on in Otniel than in Tamar, for instance. But nevertheless, I specifically brought that example because of the dangers of dehumanization, right? Because what affects politics and violence there also affects academia, right? Because if you have a general dehumanization of a population without a kind of nuanced understanding of what's going on, and you could be as critical of settlement building as you want. You could want to remove all the settlements if you'd like. But to dehumanize somebody who lives there, right, is both ethically problematic, right, and misses, again, the understanding what exactly is going on there, right? To really, truly create some kind of positive, peaceful solution, right? What you have to do, if you start treating a group as if they're unhuman, right, that's not going to help. That's going to make things worse. What you have to do is meet and listen to people on their level. And so that the whole point of bringing Itamar, and I can't comment on all of the nuances within Itamar. I only studied specific. I didn't study their politics. I studied I studied specifically the Sephardic rejuvenation. Right. Only more recently have I started going into the politics. I did not visit Itamar recently, so I can't comment on the differences, let's say, between Itamar and places like Yitzhar or something like this. Okay. And I'm sure there probably are, but the commonality is really, again, this religious value of settling the land, and in that sense they would be different, even and would be different from the left, the
Sure.
Israeli left.
Are there correlations, given that, of course, obviously it's in the context of the territories, but are there political correlations with religious practices or not?
It's too early for me to tell because I haven't been there long enough.
Okay.
And this goes also into polemics because you have accusations by different Orthodox groups that they are not religious as we are, right?
Sure.
There's kind of, one-upmanship that you see in a lot of religions, right? So a lot of religious ideological groups. So it's hard to say,
Okay.
If you talk to people who are in Otniel, they will say, oh yes, American left-wing Orthodox Jews in America are, quote-unquote, less serious, but in Israel we're really serious, and why is that? Okay? And it's not, by the way, just Orthodox people dealing. You can read Leon Wieseltier, who complains about this. So there is something there to it, but it has to be really formulated very carefully in a very nuanced fashion, not to stereotype it. So it's, again, hard for me to say. I would have to do a lot more. I can tell you that Yeshivot Kav is the Chardali approach. Within that approach, they tend to be more right-wing than the others, but that's the only pattern I've seen, and it's a very general pattern. I haven't explored it well enough. Yeah.
Okay.
Is the Ashkenazi stream as elaborate and have so many sub streams as the Sephardi one, or not?
We're talking about in Tamar specifically?
Yeah.
I didn't look at the Ashken. It's hard to call it a stream because there are so many Ashkenazi students at that school. So the only Sephardic thing about them is they're affiliated with Shas, which is a Sephardic party. Most Shas schools that I visited, not all, you either had Ashkenazi Shas schools who were there for budgetary reasons, or you had mostly Sephardic Shas schools with mostly Sephardic students. That's a general tendency. Here you had a large number of Ashkenazim, and I would have thought that the only reason they associated with them was because maybe for budgetary reasons, but it turns out there's a strong Sephardic element in there. Right? And there's a strong ideological push. And so one thing that I wanted to also get to your question about Shas, I'm not sure what you mean by right-wing or left-wing of Shas, so it's hard for me to answer it. I can tell you that Shas is less Zionistically inclined as a core, so there's a lot of tension between that school and there. I can tell you also that part of the Chardali element at the school is the fact that a number of people following the disengagement, right, kind of veered away from the state. Okay, and became kind of more Haredi in that regard. In terms of Land for Peace, I guess what you mean, they're more right-wing, and they said that. And that's not surprising, right? Again, to what degree Otniel and those places represent most people in the settlements, I can't really say. But the point is that they're there and they're strong intellectual centers, and they're going to be influenced. They're going to have influence. They will be, and there are differences, for instance, geographically, just based on conversations I've had with people between settlements within different geographical areas, as to the kinds of both class and ideology and a lot of different things. You also have a lot of cross-pollination. I see people from Itamar at Otniel. Right? So it's very hard to really know until more nuanced research is done, more anthropological research is done, which tries to understand the people my point is to, not an apology as you put it, at all. It's just the opposite. You asked about apologies or an apologetic. I think that's what you asked. You don't remember? Okay, you used the term apology, so I wasn't sure what you meant. Okay, never mind. It's an academic exercise in terms of, in order to be critical, you have to understand your subjects, right? So you have to both make a judgment, but make a judgment taking their perspective into account. That's what I was really saying, and so that's really the core of what I was trying to get at. Yeah.
Your survey of the pluralism and the religious perspectives is quite enlightening, but I want to ask about your conclusion.
Yeah.
You said in your conclusion that because of this, it is impossible to understand Orthodox Judaism today without going into the nuances of the approaches in the settlements, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Can you point to anything that you said today that you cannot find within the green line among the yeshivot? In other words, are they saying anything that's unusual, that is in addition to anything we'll hear among the regular yeshiva world, inside the green line or around the world?
So that's an interesting question, because I also looked at schools. I didn't mention them here. I also looked at schools within the green line that are also doing these kinds of research. Places in Haifa, for instance, who are also tend to do religious design. There's a lot of work being done. My point is not that there should be a divide between the two Judaisms, right? But rather an integration. In other words, you want to understand contemporary Judaism, right? You have to take into account what's being done in Otniel. I haven't checked every religious school, but I can tell you they're kind of unique to themselves. There's the school that Rav Shagar founded.
Pedagogically unique, not theologically unique. I'm asking theologically.
Well, theologically, they're very controversial. Theologically, to say, I want to inculcate, this is what Yeshivot Kav broke over. They don't want academicized anything, anywhere. Right? Even the Gush perspective is kind of like they accept there were variations in the Gemara. They just don't care about it for a variety of reasons that we can go into if you like. They don't really care about it to the same degree that they do at this school. There's a lot of controversy in terms of bringing in what some would consider secular influences. The whole justification for bringing in music, art, and things like that is this is really a part of Judaism, right? Especially for the Kabbalistic idea that the kind of Hasidic-oriented Kabbalistic idea that God's presence is really kind of seen everywhere and everything, right? And so therefore music and art also have a divine spark. You need to bring everything in. Everything is somehow connected to the divine. You can't leave anything out. That's not a position that's respected in many, many yeshivot. Could I tell you that there's a green line divide within and outside the green line? That I can't tell you. Rav Shagar himself founded his own yeshiva Tziyach Yitzchak in Efrat, that he led before he passed away. Most of the stuff he was doing passed on to Otniel, and his works is being published by his widow, who lives in Alon Shavut. And I can tell you that I believe he did found a school of music, or influenced a school of music in Tel Aviv for religious students. I would have to look at the documentary again. I don't remember all the specifics. So it's one kind of country, but I would say that to look, if you're interested, let's say, in Jewish studies, and all you've read are books about settlements, have to do with land and issue of land in Gush Emunim, you're going to be missing a large chunk of what's going on unless you actually go there and start researching, specifics of what's going on. There's been stuff that's been published in Hebrew on Rav Shagar. Rabbi Yaakov Nagen, who we just heard over here, has some stuff published in English in Tradition. Just the last issue of Tradition by YU put out something. And Alan Brill has some stuff in English. But I can tell you in America, this work is not known at all. Shagar's work is barely known. And it's a shame because it deals with all sorts of very fascinating things that Orthodoxy in America is not dealing with. Orthodoxy in America is not really dealing with postmodernism. He did deal with postmodernism in very in-depth fashion.
Rav Nagen, that was American, right?
Yes.
From his accent.
Correct. He is absolutely, he spoke in English. There's now an American program in Otniel. But he also gives gives classes in Hebrew on Rav, I've heard him speak, on Rav Soloveitchik and Rav Kook and those people all together. What's fascinating is that you can hear Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook quoted, and right afterwards Rabbi Menachem Froman, and they are totally opposite on the political spectrum. So what unites them? Well, the fact that they were respected authorities and they were committed to a certain mission, right? So yes, there's a lot of, and the American influence, by the way, goes partly through Gush. Gush has a large American presence. Rabbi Lichtenstein is from New York City. Well, I should say, right, lived in New York City, where he was originally from. Originally lived in New York City with, he was the son-in-law of Rabbi Soloveitchik. So there's a lot of American influence going on at the school, despite the fact that it's a predominantly Israeli school. So there is cross-cultural pollination, but it hasn't yet filtered back to the States. In my research, I generally found that, and this is not so surprising, but I generally found that many of the experts in America, people in Israel have not heard of, and vice versa. Because the forms of Judaism really relate to their own specific situation. But that creates a certain shallowness on the part of intellectuals doing research only on their own spheres. So what I'm about is really broadening the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So good. I look forward to talking with you more about it. So thanks for your presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, and thank you for the opportunity.